even though price is down and the market's been relatively negative surrounding Picoin, the Picoin team actually came out and set the record straight, which I think is really good. Overall, I think this long term will be a benefit. Short term, I think it kind of remains to be seen. Obviously, there's a lot of other things going on. As I talk in basically every video that I make, there's just a lot else going on here, much of it not necessarily impacting Picoin directly. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, but of course, you know, we always want to talk about price, how things could potentially look, a lot of that type of stuff. So actually, let's go on ahead. We'll jump in straight to the Pi price chart. Geez, what a tongue twister there. But what we can see is obviously really nice run up. Since then, it's basically been down only. We saw a couple periods of some sustained kind of like trying to reverse the momentum and get a push going back, but it's just basically been down only. As we can see, we're basically getting very close to what I had kind of mentioned in a couple Pi videos ago, that this is probably, on the daily, it doesn't look like too much, but on the hourly, you can see there was a little bit of an initial kind of push and retest here. So we have developed a very minor support at this kind of 62-cent level. We are at 66 cents. So there is that possibility that we kind of could stop here. If we do break through this level, we don't really have a great indication of kind of where we could be seeing price going after that. If we zoom way far out, we can kind of see exactly what I was talking about here about. We do have a little bit of that kind of historical precedent for some support at the 62-cent level. If we do not get held up here, obviously, like there's no real historical precedent at which like where we could eventually find a support. So at that point, we're probably going to like fib retraces or something like that to see if we could find kind of what that could look like. But overall, you know, I'm hopeful that we can kind of stop here. I am actually going to move us out to the daily chart back again, like I was looking at initially. Sorry, we gotta just adjust how all this looks. But if we look and we actually take this kind of this pin drawing, we can see, oh, that's funny, it's kind of drawing weird like that, but we can see it kind of is coming down. The rate of decline is definitely slowing. So I think there's a world in which we, you know, maybe we start to see things flatten out and then start to head back up. I think is kind of what we could be seeing. Again, with something like this, with something like this, we could potentially be seeing, you know, an ultimate, like very long-term type of cup and handle forming. Again, you know, we kind of come back up to this level, maybe stop out kind of back to where we saw previously, see a little bit of pullback, and then of course, you know, with a cup and handle, we'd see something like that. Now, of course, I cannot predict the future. This is me really going out on the deep end, just guessing at what we could possibly see. But we are kind of seeing at least the left side of this cup potentially starting to form, and then we just have to see that kind of right side continue. This could work out timing wise potentially with what we're looking to see, even if we were to extend this out a little bit. You know, a lot of people are looking toward June for potentially being a period in which we could see some really positive price action. So we could kind of see something like this happen. Now, again, we have to remember, yes, recent price action on Pi does look very negative, but we just need to keep in mind that this is not the end of the world, right? I mean, this was a very successful project that's been around for multiple years. It's got a huge community. It launched to a ton of fanfare, a ton of hype, kind of at the very end of when things were starting to do okay. And since then, we've been in a really bad market, right? And so, of course, as I mentioned in the last video, there's a lot of people, I think, looking for kind of some of that easy money. A lot of people have been mining Pi for potentially 6 years, potentially 8 years. I think most of the people have kind of been 6 or 7 for kind of like the OGs. And so that's kind of what we've been seeing here. And I think it's just very important to note that this is all technically free money for them. I obviously realize that it's not actually free, but it kind of is in a sense, right? And so there's a lot of people who might just be trying to secure profits. There's a lot of other people who are kind of, you know, at this like $2 to $3 range who are like, no, I'm never selling. You know, I think that's been proven to be a really bad decision. So hopefully, you know, most of those people came to their senses, at least at some point. Obviously, you know, they did not call the top here, but we could be seeing some of those capitulation from some of those who were not selling up here because they thought it was going to go to $50 or $100 or, you know, whatever. Obviously, things kind of coming back to reality a little bit. as I have mentioned, we're very, very close to what seems to be kind of that support of last defense. After that, we're just going to kind of be in no man's land in terms of historical precedent for support, at least. Now, if we look here, you can see that this is tradable on BTCC. If you are looking to trade, maybe you think we're going to be calling the bottom. As you can see here, I do have that kind of trend line. If we go back to the hourly, you can kind of see how this trend line is looking. We can see that the rate of descent has been slowing a little bit. Obviously, still moving to the downside, but the rate of descent is slowing. We also can see that it appears like the volume is picking up. I have noticed that the volume indicators on BTCC have sometimes been a little unreliable, so I'm not certain on exactly if this is true, but if it is true, we can see that volume is actually coming up even though price is coming down, which is a really, really interesting kind of thing that we are seeing here. So there is still a lot of sell pressure on the chart, but again, that's always going to happen with a TGE, particularly when there are so many people mining for such a long period of time. This does not at all really make me feel too weird just about what's going on. If we do actually go look down here at the RSI, let me actually pull this up a little bit and go to full screen. I just realized I was not in full screen. We can see, consistently kind of below average, but nothing too crazy. There was obviously a decent bit of kind of overselling here and overselling here. If we go back to the daily, we can see, much to my complete surprise, RSI still not actually oversold at this point, which is very, very surprising. Not at all something I would have expected there. So pretty interesting. But like I said, if you are interested in trading Picoin, maybe trying to call the bottoms, whatever, any of this type of stuff, again, my personal opinion, again, not financial advice, but my personal opinion is that we could be getting to that point where a low leverage long could make sense. Again, we are getting very, very close to this level of support here. And so if this support does hold, could be a fantastic time to be getting in, particularly if we're looking at doing some low leverage, because, back to the top here, it's about a 5x. You play that on 2x leverage, that's a 10x, 3x, 15x. You guys get it. That's kind of how that would work. So if you are interested, I do have the link to BTCC as well as WEEX and Phemex in the description below. Tons of great deposit bonuses for all of them. 10% match on BTCC as well as up to $10,000, $20,000 or $30,000 on WEEX, and then $4,800 as well as some really, really great grid bot trading as well as pilot. Just cut out before as well as, and I'll just start from there. As well as a really new and interesting feature they're doing called pilot contracts, which essentially allows you to trade DEX coins on a centralized exchange. They've come out with some really interesting kind of tech improvement to enable that, which I do think is really cool. Now, moving on, we're going to go look at the kind of rest of the market. We can see Pi down 4.3% on the day, kind of in line with what we're seeing out of the rest of the market. Obviously, there's a couple greens here and there, but overall, the market as a whole down a decent chunk today. We can see, basically everything here. Week, if we will let it go, there we go. For the week, basically everything red. We've, I think, got about 5, maybe about 7 or 8 green bubbles here. Walrus and EOS kind of the only two of note. We've got a couple here. It looks like these are mostly stable coins as well as the Ton coin, and then TRX down here as well. So otherwise, rough week for crypto, kind of becoming the norm here. Month, we've got a little bit more greens in here, but again, still the vast majority red, and the same thing with the year, vast majority red as well, with, again, a couple going, green here and there, but overall things looking generally rough for crypto. And a lot of this is kind of supported by what we've seen recently in the market overview. The Bitcoin open interest and price obviously continuing to fall. We can see that the entire market is in the weak category when looking at RSI, and then also the exchange liquidation maps. We can see on the 1 and 7 day definitely a preference back to the upside, just because we have seen a bunch of kind of shuffling around over the past couple of days. There's really we've seen a bunch of volatility going on here, and I think a lot of that is just kind of freaking out investors. A lot of people who are potentially overexposed or don't want to deal with the volatility and the potential perceived risk in the market, that is going to leave them kind of sitting on the sidelines. We can also see here, we were actually in neutral yesterday, but we have moved back into fear. I feel like that makes sense. I mean, there's essentially a whole bunch of fear going on within kind of the overall crypto market. because of what we are seeing with tariffs, I think a lot of people are trying to figure out how exactly this is going to affect the market, because we've really never seen it before. And so because of that, people are trying to figure that out. And then once they do have a good idea, then obviously from there, I think a lot of that perceived risk or perceived uncertainty will go away. And that obviously is a very good thing. It's a very good thing for markets. So I think for better or for worse, some of this uncertainty, again, whether for better or for worse, meaning if the market goes up or even if the market goes down, I think at least having a clear vision of which direction we are actually indeed going is going to make a pretty big difference. Now, one other thing that I want to go back to surrounding Pi specifically is a little bit more of like kind of the ecosystem or kind of the community sentiment surrounding Pi coin, which is honestly, it's very, very confusing and surprising to me. So we can see here on the Pi website, they do actually have a disclaimer. Pi is not free money. Pi is not free money is a long-term project whose success depends on the collective contributions of its members. Pi is dedicated to helping everyday people participate in a utilities-based ecosystem on a blockchain fueled by a cryptocurrency without the need for traditional intermediaries. If you are looking for quick money, look elsewhere. So again, I think this is a pretty strong statement from the Pi team coming out telling people exactly how they think about their project and how they think about their tokens specifically. I think this makes sense. I think any real and legitimate crypto project, they're not looking for these, pump and dump schemes. They're not looking for these super quick gains, anything like that. Now, of course, crypto traders trade them like that, but that's not something that the company can necessarily do about that. Overall, I think the important thing to note here is that these guys do have a longer term vision, and I think that's good. Now, again, whether they mean that or whether this is just kind of some posturing to make people feel like, they didn't just pump and dump it or whatever. Hard to say for sure. If we do look at the chart, obviously it's very clear that we went straight up and then straight down. But I do think that, while this could be market manipulation, I do think that we have to remember there's a lot of people who got a lot of money from this airdrop, or that I guess I should call it the TGE of the Pi coin. And so there's a lot of people who had thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars that they may not have had before, right? And so I think it's completely reasonable that some of these early adopters are wanting to cash out on some of their benefits from being early, and that of course is creating immense selling pressure. So with that, of course there's breeding a lot of negativity and negative sentiment within the community. We can see here a post from Pi News, again, essentially just like having a post that kind of goes along with what they've been seeing here. And what we can see here is there's a lot of people here. If you go read through the comments here, there is a bunch of negativity. I mean, really, really crazy amounts of negativity. Obviously, you have some people who are definitely, they believe in it, but there's a lot of people who are very, very negative about what's going on. And so I think that kind of, this is par for the course, right? I mean, people are taking profits. The people who are buying the tops or even buying things on the way down, definitely, not super, they're not going to be super happy with what's going on here. But I think what we're seeing, in my opinion at least, feels pretty natural or pretty reasonable for what's going on, because essentially what we've seen here is we've seen a TGE event where a lot of people are starting to take profits, and there's just not, this is a bad time in the market, right? There's not people around to buy, and the buying pressure to support all of the people trying to take profits. To me, this is very simple, very basic market dynamics. And I have kind of you can go back and take a look at my previous videos. I was talking about how while Pi was an interesting coin, it did seem to have the possibility where it could go down a very substantial amount just because of exactly what's going on. There's a lot of people who are looking to take profits. There's probably not a lot of people who are looking to essentially buy the bags off of these early adopters. And so, of course, that's naturally going to produce price moving down. That's just how it is. Hopefully, some of you who may have gotten caught in this and may have potentially lost, or, either lost money or lost paper money because you had Pi that you didn't sell. Hopefully you can just take this as a learning experience. In my mind, this is where the kind of the experiment for Pi starts, again, in my mind, because now what we need to see is a couple of different things. One, we need to see price start to stable out, particularly hopefully around this key level of support. The second thing is we also need to see real interesting, useful innovations coming out around the Pi ecosystem. If we see that happen, I do think we will see Pi price come back. I think it's pretty simple market dynamics, but overall, it's very, very critical that we see actual real things happening on the Pi network, because if we don't, then it's just going to be like every other crypto vaporware project and eventually bleed to zero as they normally do. So that's kind of what we're seeing here. Overall, again, I'm not particularly bearish on Pi. I think what we've seen happen is exactly what I was expecting to happen. As I've just barely mentioned, the real work or the real test for Pi comes next. And so I'm very interested to see kind of how that goes. I think it's great from the Pi team trying to set the record straight. You know, again, everybody who's trying to build a real valuable project, that does not come overnight. A lot of what they're waiting for and a lot of what they're needing is the community involvement and the community to be building on their network. We'll see if that happens, right? So anyway, hopefully you found the information in this video useful. If you did, a like and a subscribe really, really do help. Also, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, anything like that, just drop those in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your opinion on the Pi network. Are you bullish? Are you bearish? Do you think that they're scamming the community? What do you think is going on? I'd love to hear your guys' comments. Also, I do have that link in the description below to the Patreon. If you do want to get signed up and join my private community, really kind of fun place to be, talk to people who are, kind of in the crypto market a little bit deeper and always kind of looking for updates. You also can interact with me a little bit more personally. I try to share some of my thoughts and answer questions, a lot of that type of stuff, a little bit more real time as well. So if you are interested, link in the description below. Just check that out if that's something you're interested in. So anyway, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.